So thank you everyone for joining us today for what is day 4 of our Marine Economy Week 2024. In today's session and discussion, we're going to be focusing on the importance of people and skills within Scotland's growing renewable energy sector. My name is Ashley Fleming and I head up the immigration practice here at Harper McLeod. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by Claire Mack, who is the Chief Executive of Scottish Renewables. Scottish Renewables is the representative voice of Scotland's renewable energy industry, and as its Chief Executive, Claire is responsible for leading the organisation's work to grow Scotland's renewable sector. So I am really keen to hear from Claire today to get her views on the importance of people and skills within the renewable sector, and for her really to share her insights with us today. So welcome, Claire, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you. No, delighted to be here. Thanks, Ashley.
Great. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. It is a live session today, so there will be an opportunity for questions and answers when we get to the end of the session. So if anyone does want to put any questions either to myself or to Claire, if you can make use of the chat function, and then we'll take a look at those towards the end and see whether there's further discussion to be had around any issues people want to raise. So to start us off, I think it is important for us to consider the wider context of this discussion and look at the real opportunities that the offshore energy sector represents for Scotland. Scotland obviously has its own renewable energy targets, but there's also a sizable pipeline of projects within the sector. So we've got, port investment, there's GB Energy, and obviously we have the 2 new green free ports within Scotland. And to capitalise on the opportunities that all these projects bring, both for Scotland and the wider UK, developing a skills programme, I think, is going to be key to Scotland establishing itself as an offshore renewables hub and to put itself firmly within the centre of energy transition. But I think the question I think we're going to look at today is how much of that potential and that opportunity will depend in part on having the right people and skills in place, and what can be done, what is being done, what initiatives are in place to really bring on and develop a skills programme in Scotland. And I think before we get to that, I'd like to just bring you in, Claire, and just ask you to give your view on the current offshore renewables landscape and how you see the potential for growth within the sector going forward.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's no secret, is it? And welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come to this discussion. And it's no secret that offshore wind is very much powering growth in renewables at the moment. And, while we've got a really strong onshore pipeline again for the first time in 9 years or so, the offshore pipeline has been the thing that has really, really powered investment, this ports investment that you're talking about, and a lot of the growth that's in there. So I think, whilst it's challenging to deploy, we're kind of getting on top of that. When we understand what's happening in the sector, we kind of understand what we need to do. We've got better line of sight, I would say, of the renewables pipeline than we've ever had, and that's to do with the way that the offshore is leased, which is quite different actually to onshore, which does give you a bit more certainty because we do sort of spatial planning ahead of time, and that spatial planning concept has now come into the wider renewable sector through the work of NESO and others in terms of trying to, and Ofgem, of course, in the regulatory space, in terms of trying to accelerate, because people recognise that we can, and the industry recognises that an element of strategic spatial planning does help in that space. So we have now got, within Scotland, we've got an amazing offshore pipeline. So of course we have about 3 gigs of operational fixed, with a little bit of floating in there. So largely that's been smaller kind of test and demonstration sites, a bit some of the big ones as well, like Kincardine. Under construction, another 1.3. In the consenting process, about the same again, a little bit more. But in planning, about 6 gigawatts. And then ScotWind, of course, came along and has just added a massive amount into that pipeline. So basically about another 9 gigawatts in terms of fixed in pre-planning. And then, of course, the 15 and a half or the more of gigawatts in terms of floating. two very different technologies, and two very different technologies from the point of view of deployment, which means that the supply chain and the skills that you need to do them are also very different. I think INTOG will help us to get there. So that's the Integrated Innovation and Oil and Gas Programme, which is good, provides a bit of stepping stone, and great to see the Greenvolt site come through there. So we are, we're in a good place in terms of pipeline for offshore. Let's not forget as well about, so Ocean Energy Europe has just been held in Scotland, so let's not forget about Wave and Tidal. Scotland has very much been the home of Wave and Tidal. So again, CFD-backed tidal projects come through is incredible. Deliverability is absolutely key on this, and the tidal sector in particular is currently running at around about 80% local content, and that's something that they really want to continue to build on and to grow. Again, that has strong implications for people and skills. So through AR4 for delivery year 2027, 40 megawatts. We've got AR5, 53 by 2028, AR6, 28 megawatts by 2029. We're starting to see a bit of a tapering off of that kind of pipeline, but that's to be expected. Vast majority of that's here in Scotland. Then you've got Wave coming really up through the ranks. That's one of my key takeaways, I think, from this week at Ocean Energy Europe is that we've now genuinely got Wave projects that I feel could make an appearance in the CFD next time round. Core Power and others who are really starting to push on devices that have run contiguously for such a long period of time now, that they've got technical credibility in order to get into that. And don't forget about floating solar. Nova Innovation, of course, looking at that. So, again, Scotland, again, really taking the lead in all of this stuff. But one of the things that as a trade association that we've sort of come to grips or are getting to grips with is that we've spent a long time making the case for generation. We've made the case, for routes to market for generation and all of that. And now we've got, a really strong kind of route to market mechanism. It has been bouncy, but we've now at this point in time, really strong route to market mechanism. PPA market's really picking up as well. And so you start to see the growing pains issue, which is that, how the heck are we going to deliver all this stuff? And that's where the people thing comes in.
Yeah, and I think it's right. It's really exciting, all of the economic opportunities that these projects are bringing to Scotland. But you're right, taking it back to sort of both the here and the now, but also looking forward is the question of skills and people. And there is that demand within Scotland, within the sector, for that skilled workforce, and there are critical skills gaps within the sector, be that engineering, project management, planning, whatever it is. But I think from my perspective, coming at it from an immigration lawyer's perspective, I often see the use of international workers and them playing a critical role in addressing some of these energy demands and meeting needs of the sector. And it's a really key resource for the sector, but it's not without its challenges, in that we have seen so many changes to immigration policy in recent years, and that is continual. So there's that need for organisations to continually adapt and to change their processes. So you may not be able to, at the start of a project, when you're costing it out, you wouldn't necessarily have thought of additional costs of visa processes and applications for people to bring them on board. So it can add additional layers and considerations to the process. I'm just wondering what you're seeing in terms of the skills gaps within the industry, and what kind of strategies you think are being helpfully introduced or need to be introduced to address these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that you made, the key point that you're making actually is absolutely salient, and we do hear that, which is the additional cost, particularly in mariners shipping. That's one of the areas that we're genuinely feeling the pinch on the visas point. And, hearing of hundreds of thousands, if not more, of pounds additional going into budget lines as a result of changes to visa. And uncertainty doesn't help. And the fact, that it did take people a bit of time to kind of get used to the fact that actually we couldn't do what we used to be able to do.
Yeah,
and there's a lag.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think from what I'm seeing is, one of the major issues we've had in recent years has been Brexit, and we are like 4 years past the end of the transition period, but we're still seeing organisations adapt now, to move away from that, open tap of skilled workers within Europe that could come in at the drop of a hat to work on Scottish projects. They were there, they could come in, and now seeing organisations have to take a step back and think, well, actually, that's not there for us now. What can we do? And there has been that move to look to visa sponsorship through the immigration process available in the UK, but it's not necessarily been something that's happened quickly, because I think it's often been driven by necessity rather than perhaps forward planning. So it's about, okay, we've got this big project, we need, 50 welders now, and we need them, bring them in. Where are we going to get them? There isn't anybody within the resident labour market. So I think it's that kind of that life cycle, as it were, of organisations kind of getting to grips with those changes in processes, and often it's only happening when it affects them directly. And I think when we're talking about this pipeline of massive projects, essentially, we need to be looking at the bigger, longer term picture.
Totally agree. And I think, let's go back in history a bit on this one, because we've never been good at this. Right? This isn't just a Brexit thing. Don't think certainly not in my working life. We've never been good at this. And there's a few issues at the heart of this. And one has been that stuttering pipeline. That's been, that's always been accepted, is that had we have had better line of sight, we'd have been able to plan skills. Would we have done it? I don't know. Because, we just do seem to be pretty bad at this. And I think one of the core issues at the heart of this is there are sort of three different flavours in terms of skills, right? So you've got the shortages, which is what we're talking about. That's a kind of a numbers thing, where really demand is going to outstrip supply. If you don't import, you're going to end up just in a wage price spiral, and that's not good for anybody. Then you've got gaps, skills gaps, which is basically the just transition point, which is you've got people who kind of fill or hit the spot, but are going to take a bit of time to get up to speed. And how do you attract them in, because there's potentially wage differentials and that kind of thing. So then you've got to think about attractiveness as used as provision, either private or public sector provision, in order to skill people up to fit those gaps. The other problem that I see is cannibalization, is the fact that what we're working with in offshore is a number of global companies who have phenomenal opportunities for their people all over the world. And, people are getting the chance to go and work in kind of pretty exciting places. Or you can go into the middle of the North Sea in January. It's that kind of, and so we have to be very alive to that fact that actually there is quite literally a sea of opportunity out there. And, again, Scotland and the ScotWind projects and everything else that's going on here have to be really attractive to them. I think the other issue that we've got here is evidence base, right? We don't have a good handle on the numbers. We don't understand. We don't have the data to give us good intelligence on what we have, never mind what we need, right? And what we need is going to be determined by pipeline. Deployment equals employment. You can't get away from that particular equation. But, as a trade association, again, we've been kind of getting to grips with the fact that in the past, we've been pushing for generation. Now I'm in a much broader space where I am talking about things like people and skills, but because it's now so important to that deployment pathway. And when you get to the point where the trade association is the place where the skills, the skills count for the sector and the people count for the sector is happening, which is the work that we've done with the Fraser of Allender Institute. We do that on an annualised basis. Last count, we've got 42,000 jobs, about 15,000 of those in offshore wind. We've seen a massive uptick. But the message is still not landing with government that you need to do this, because you need to track this, because you are the people who hold the purse strings with regards to the skills sector. We can talk a bit further on about private sector provision, because I've got some pretty strong opinions around about that as to how that's impacting the sector. But that evidence base being missing is really meaning politicians are struggling with the hearts and minds part of immigration, right? It's a massively divisive, emotive issue. And if you cannot demonstrate that you can ably employ everybody who wants a job in the UK, and then you are going to need to top that up with something else which you can you can nuance to be a benefit, a wider benefit to the country. But if you haven't got the evidence base to do that, nobody's believing your story, and you're getting no further than stop the boats. You're not getting into any kind of reasonably sophisticated argument about how we can use the skills from other economies who are maybe better at some things than us, to upskill our own economy, or our own people. So we just can't have that conversation because it hits the political barrier.
And I think that's a really good point. I think with the immigration narrative, it is such a divisive topic, and it's politicised. And we've just gone through an election cycle where it was at the forefront of many of the manifestos that were put out there, talking about what each party was prepared to do. And I think there's also a fear there with political parties about how much they can push the agenda, even when it helps industry, because there is this potential for a negative backlash, and that's not helpful and or healthy, I think, for industry in general. But I think with the current Labour government come in, they aren't prepared to do anything radically different from the Conservative government. They are focused on reducing net migration. They're focused on reducing the reliance on overseas workers to fill these skills gaps. So I think you're right, this evidence base is really important. And I just wondered, some of the initiatives that are being put forward, I wonder, just we'll go through a few of those to see what your view is on them and whether they are going to serve a purpose. I mean, the first, I think, is, well, we've got a few that are, one in particular that's very sort of focused on the renewable sector is the energy passport scheme, and the idea of taking those that are already within the oil and gas sector, upskilling or reskilling, and identifying transferable skills and enable them to have recognition of those qualifications, those experience, and for those workers to essentially transition into the renewable sector. And there's obviously a whole huge number of individuals that work within that sector that could potentially be in some ways a ready-made workforce for the renewable sector to tap into. I mean, do you think that is a positive initiative? Do you think that's something that could work?
I do think it is, and I've been a real supporter of the Skills Passport for a long time. It's been taken forward by colleagues at Renewable UK and with OUK, but initially sort of started life with PITO and a group that was the Energy Skills Alliance, because this was recognised a number of years ago. I mean, that was back probably during pre-COVID, actually, so four years ago or so. And I did genuinely do believe it's a good idea, mostly from the point of view of it takes out a bit of, it makes your labour market just a bit more fluid. It makes your labour market more smooth, and does allow for that. I mean, it's not a silver bullet. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's going to equalise wages straight away and mean that that people will flip between sectors. It doesn't mean that you don't then need to have an intense focus on health and safety, because the environments are slightly different. The kit is slightly different. When you're dealing with high voltage electricity out at sea, it is different to drilling kit. But we do need to sort of be really alive to the fact that it can help do some of the things that we need it to do, but there will also be bits that are pretty bespoke that, in order to make sure that the job's done well, to high spec, high quality, and people are safe, to make sure that happens. So I do think it is helpful. It seems to have been a too lengthy a conversation, in all honesty. It has seemed to have taken a lot of time to do something that, I suppose, on the face of it looked relatively simple, and then there was a bit of devil in the detail. But I think as well there was probably a little bit of embedded or entrenched positioning going on there. And I just mean that we've got some fairly large training and skills providers, particularly in the oil and gas space, I would say, who stood to sort of have to sort of reduce their size of the pie, maybe, and that I think was part of the difficulty with it. I do think it was more challenging perhaps than it should have been, but we're there, and that's great. And I think it's a great signal, because one of the things that, again, from research that we've done at Scottish Renewables, that we know is that there is actually a really big appetite from those people currently working in oil and gas in Scotland to learn about renewables. They recognise that their sector is where it is. Renewables hasn't caused the depletion of the North Sea basin. That was happening anyway. That's just a sort of geological fact. We were always going to have to manage decline in the oil and gas sector. And one of the things that does make me a little bit raises my blood pressure a little is when we have this kind of really polarized conversation about renewables are not going to provide the jobs to mop up the decline in oil and gas. Renewables is not responsible for the decline in oil and gas. We're here to kind of help smooth it, but we're not here to provide a one-for-one job for the oil and gas sector. The oil and gas sector have got a massive spread of different skills within them that can be applied in various different sectors. It doesn't necessarily need to be renewables, but we do have to accept that whole situation needed managed anyway. It's the rate of change that is going to be the difference here, and that is something that we should be focused on, which is that as we've started to see the oil and gas sector talk a lot about how they are becoming less attractive to people because just of the general reputation and purpose of the sector, and finding that their values are maybe making some people make different decisions, younger people in particular, and it is about growing the renewables pipeline at a steady, predictable rate so that people do have that ability to use something like a skills passport.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you're right in terms of the opportunities within oil and gas perhaps being less attractive. People are looking for long-term careers. We're not just talking about wanting a job, or we're trying to think of, if I get into this industry, what is my career path going to look like? Is there something that someone can get in and develop? And I think coming back to that evidence base and having that pipeline is really important. I think the other initiative that, and this is something that the Labour government is pushing, is Skills England, which will cover the devolved administrations as well. But that is really doing what you're saying is needed, and that's the idea, is to look at the skills gaps across the labour market and work collaboratively. And I think this is what's really key, and I think we've seen this in some of the work done by the Green Freeports, is collaboration with various different stakeholders. It's not just about me and what I can achieve, it's about what we can do together, because there is this bigger picture kind of view on the sector that's needed. And so taking in a kind of evidence-based approach, much more structured, long-term planning and thinking around, well, what is the pipeline? When are we needing these skills? When do they need to come on board? So what has to happen now for that to happen in the future? I think that'd be really important.
Completely. And it is. And let's just think of it again. Let's go back in history. In Scotland, we've never really done this before. We've acted tactically, right? So certainly, I was born in 1975. So, in my living memory, I can remember the first energy transition, coal miners and all of that. We've only ever really acted tactically, certainly in my working life anyway, which is that we've tried to, plug gaps. Johnny Walker's shutting, we need to find somewhere for people to work. Michelin's shutting, we need to go and find somewhere for these people to work. We've never been in this really actually positive place where, we've got a multi-decade pipeline of projects that, if we can get them, on a steady drumbeat, we have now got, you've placed a huge amount of demand for people into the market. And that's a really, really important point, is this needs a different approach, which is where Skills England is helpful. And I think it will help to set the tone, because it is about that collaborative point, as you said, getting intelligence out of industry. Again, something industry's not actually been that good at. We need to be a bit sharper on it. The problem, again, with skills for industry is it's an ahead of time investment. And it's a particular issue for the renewables sector with that ahead of time issue. It's the same issue that we face with the supply chain, is that the value and the money doesn't flow into these projects until very late stage. Too late. For our traditional pipeline of people to be, your 5-year graduate, or, even an apprentice, whilst they can hit the ground running a bit earlier, still kind of 4 years before you genuinely would leave them, to manage some things on their own. And so we again need to think about new ways of doing this. and managing the humps in the process. You know, we really, really need to tune into that project pipeline. You know, I hear a lot of discussion about welders. You know, everywhere you go, everybody needs welders, and
Yeah.
they're brilliant. You know, we do need welders. We need them for all sorts of things. But really, at this point in the process, when I'm looking at stuff that's in pre-planning and going through consenting, I need planners and lawyers. That's what we need. You know, that's these things you know need cultivated and grown as well, and we need to grow that capacity in local authorities and all the other people that support that consenting process, because you can see the bits of the drag on the process. You know, people continually come back to grid. Oh, grid's an issue. Grid is an issue, but by golly, you know, there's some really interesting stuff that's been done there in the last couple of years. How do you apply that same logic to consenting? You know, in grid, they've smashed open the regulatory, you know, paradigm that they've always used, the framework that they've always used, very defined 5-year windows. This is how much you're allowed to spend. This is how much they're like, no. That's not going to cut it anymore. We're going to have to, you know, do something accelerated. And we're not applying that same logic into planning and consenting. And one of the reasons is that we need to grow the number of people in there as well. So we need that strategic long-term thinking. I think if I look at other countries, I've been really fortunate throughout my career through various different jobs that I've done. You know, I worked with SCDI for a while, and they had a very close relationship with Skills Development Scotland. I think it's a great thing. And went to Switzerland with both organisations together to see what they do. You know, in Switzerland, completely different approach to skills, completely different. You know, we've really prized and pushed the higher education sector. Their model is almost entirely vocational, about 85% vocational. So they grab kids at 15 and they get them into the workplace. You know, I was being presented to on that trip by, you know, 16 and 17-year-olds who were telling me how their factory worked. You know, it was mind-blowing. It was just great. You know, this really sort of patient and well-planned system. Not long back from Sweden, when I went to see factory that, you know, I think there's over 2,000 people on that site who are delivering, you know, grid gear across the world. You know, that's what they're building there. Massive factory. But you can't just, you know, my great wish when I went there was like, great, we're going to get a mini version of this in Scotland. And my eyes were opened, because you go there and you think, oh, crumbs. This is 10 years at least in the making. And it's that patient point is we've not done what we need to do, but it's you keep coming back to this sort of phrase, don't you? So when was the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Next best time is today. And that's what we need to start thinking, you know, about with skills. New pathways, faster, accelerated pathways. And, you know, let's think about the future. Let's think about how we plant the seeds today for the people that we need tomorrow. And that'll help with the immigration conversation. You know, if people genuinely see that what we're doing is just filling a stopgap with the bit that they don't really like, plans for the future, which will mean that their kids and their grandkids will benefit from this, I think it will help that kind of social conversation that is really, really, really difficult here.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do think some of these conversations that are had and some of the points that you've raised, it feels like it is filtering through though. And I think we've seen some of that, particularly with the Green Freeports coming on, and there appears to be the much more collaborative way of thinking and approaching these issues. For example, I think the Inverness and Cromarty Green Freeport, they have their Powerhouse initiative, which I think is very similar to what we're discussing in terms of Skills England, you know, bringing business and academia together and having them have those conversations early about, well, what is it you need? When do you need it? How are we going to achieve that? How can education providers within, whether it's the Highlands and Islands or, you know, more broadly the rest of the UK, help to bring these people on board? But you've also got to get them, like you're saying in Switzerland, get them young, get children interested, young people interested in the sector. You've got to attract them and make it an exciting prospect. And I think going out and having that engagement with high school students, you know, with people at college, at university, to really spark their interest in the sector is going to be a really, really important tool to really bring people in.
Completely, and I don't mean to be critical, but the other big difference I saw between Switzerland and here, the career service took a much greater hand in that. You know, they really did reach into schools, and I think that's the point. Is that, you know, I've got 2 kids myself. They're 17 and 18. They've both just gone on this journey of transitioning from school into uni in the workplace, and I think one of the things that's really struck me there in that particular point in life is that they're heavily influenced, you know, because they're young, they're heavily influenced by what their most, you know, next need is rather than their future need. And I think perhaps that's the conversation that we're maybe not having so well with kids. You know, they can go and earn £12 an hour in McDonald's and they think that that's a king's ransom. They think that's amazing. You know, a job, yep, they can get a job, but do they really want any job, or do they really, you know, and you know, and I think that there is probably, again, let's think different. I think there is something in the school system and in the career system in particular. So let's not load any more on teachers, but, you know, think about, you know, that backup service, which is, you know, the advice that we're giving, you know, to the ones, you know, my son left, you know, effectively left school after second year. He was a school avoider, just, you know, didn't want to be there, but loves his job. Absolutely loves his job, you know, so let's tap into that, you know, let's work with the grain of that instead of being so fixated on, you know, the established pathways of, you know, my daughter did the traditional thing, she stayed on to 6th year, she's gone on to uni, you know, this worked for her, it's great, but it doesn't work for everyone.
Exactly. I think taking that more holistic approach, it's not a one size fits all, and that is across the board, whether it's, you know, looking at the different opportunities for individuals entering the sector, whether it's youngsters coming in, whether it's career changers, whether it's people returning to the workforce. These are all possible avenues that can be explored within the sector. We shouldn't just focus on, you know, on one of these, but let's make use of them all, and where we fall short, sure, we can use the immigration system to top up as and when is needed. But I think there's lots of positivity within the sector. There's lots to be excited about. I think it's just a question of making sure that there's buy-in from all the various stakeholders.
I think buy-in's important. I think investment's important too. And I really get very frustrated with the conversations that we have continually about the public sector's got no money. Yeah, I know the public sector's got no money. I do understand it. But careful choices mean that you are investing to grow, you know, and I think that's a great kind of message that's coming actually from the Labour government in Westminster right now, is that, you know, we do need to get that buy-in. You need to sort of really work with people, and you need to invest in it and make it good, you know, and all this is innovation, you know, and innovation and skills is no different to innovation anywhere else in the economy. It does need a bit of work. It needs a bit of effort. It needs a bit of vision, and it needs a bit of investment to make it work, and make it kind of really real for people. And I think that's the bit that probably, again, is the hearts and minds side of stuff, is that we do need to start to really think different, but we need to do that really quickly, so that we do take the opportunities as they come at us.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the hearts and minds aspect, we have to bring local communities along with us. I think one of the issues within the sector has been location, you know, in terms of attracting people to particular locations to live and work, versus the natural depopulation of those areas as well, with, you know, particularly with youngsters leaving the Highlands and Islands at a young age and migrating towards, you know, the Central Belt or further afield. And so it's about all the other issues that go along with that, in terms of housing, in terms of access to healthcare, to education. So again, it's just the case of we've got a potential problem and a solution, but we have to look at it and deal with all the sort of issues that stem from that as well, if we're going to have a sustainable future within the sector.
I totally agree. I think again, it's that none of this is simple, right? There's no easy answers here, because we'll be doing it
if it was, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But we're on the one hand, we're writing the book for deployment of offshore energy, which is difficult but really exciting proposition, which means you've got a bit of learning by doing going on, which means you need a very particular kind of workforce in there. You need an adaptable workforce, which is that skills and people thing. And I think on the housing point and immigration more widely, it doesn't just stop with that hearts and minds of let's convince people immigration is a good thing. Look at Sweden. I reflect again on my conversations when I was over there last week. Any ask on immigration needs a wider conversation with government about how they're going to make it work in socioeconomic terms. How are people going to not feel disadvantaged or disgruntled by new people coming in? And some of that's about, public services and housing. And those are pre-existing issues as well. But you do really need to treat these things finely. In Sweden, they've seen a real, they went for a massive, I think it was about 1 million, or was it? Yeah, 1 million into a country of 10 million, really, really quickly. They did that, and it was it's had real issues for them, really, really big issues for them. But I think again, it's that it's about that risk too of not having the right conversation at the right time with industry, but also not understanding industry. Unfortunately for us in offshore wind in particular, a delay to a project is very rarely 3 days or 4, it can be years, and particularly if it's a legal delay, if it's legal challenge, we've seen how that can happen. And the last thing anybody wants, particularly if you're talking about some of the more fragile economies in the country, up north in the rural areas, in Ardersier and places like that, the last thing you want to do is encourage small and medium-sized enterprises to invest in skills and supply chain, and then have a project hit the buffers, and you've got idle you've created some structural unemployment, by accident. You've got latency within it. And so we need to be really, really sharp. If we're going to do this grow your own strategy, we need to be really clear what the plan A is, based on which projects and where they're going to be and what they're going to do, but also what's the plan B if, we do hit delays and that kind of thing. And I guess it's exciting. It's an exciting opportunity, and there is a really strong market for these skills. But the other thing we need to be really aware of is maintaining that, keep coming back to this project pipeline. Otherwise they will, the energy workforce generally is very mobile. We've seen that in oil and gas. Yeah. They're all over the world. I live on the doorstep of Grangemouth, and, went to school. Everybody in my cohort at school, pretty much, if you were, worked in BP as it was then, and have gone either generally sort of offshore or have stayed in and around that kind of area. And the ones that have gone offshore, you see it on Facebook, they're everywhere. They're like Baku, they're and Alden, Angola, all different places in the world. And so, you have to be very alive to that fact that you've always got to have something, the magnet that draws them here.
Back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed. No, exactly. So I think summing up, really exciting prospects, but there's definitely still work to be done.
Careful thought. Careful thought.
Exactly. So I think if we pause there, maybe just bring in some of the delegates that are joining us today with questions. We had a couple of questions before today that were sent in. So I'm just going to first of all put a question to you. I think this is one ideally for you, Claire, and it's from someone at Shetland Islands Council, and their question was, what protections are there to ensure offshore wind does not interfere with the valuable fishing grounds around the Scottish coast? And how can fishing interests, economic and environmental, be protected, and can these industries live in harmony? So a lot to unpack there.
Right, there is a lot to unpack. So the fishing conversation is, again, it's one of these areas of contention where it needs us to get a better understanding of both sectors and what the limitations are. So we've done a lot of work with the fishing sector. Their current position is, and they've stated this, that they don't think floating offshore wind and fishing can coexist. That's a real problem for us. And we're working on it with them. I think that some of that's to do with imperfect information. We are, as a sector, are at a point where we're still refining what technology choice we're going to make in terms of structures out in the ocean, and therefore it's impossible for the fishing sector to give us to give themselves comfort that they can work around this. And so, that has to be a really close and ongoing conversation. Thankfully, we've got fora for that to happen. I spoke to Elspeth at SFF just this week. She's right in the middle of quota negotiations, so she's frazzled, but making progress, I believe. And that's a really important relationship for me. I manage that one myself because it is so important, right? And I can't say that I've got every answer here and can give you a definitive yes or no, and that yes, we can coexist. I'm absolutely sure of it. How that's going to happen is a matter for us to continually discuss and debate, because I recognise the importance of that sector. I recognise myself that this isn't just about their offshore operations. And again, I've been so lucky to be surrounded by such super smart people who help me to understand these things, Elspeth being one of them. And I recognised when I went out with her, I went to Peterhead, went to Fraserburgh, I saw the fish market, I saw pelagic trawlers that fish pretty far out, and then went onshore to see the onshore operations. And all of this is totally interconnected for her. So it's not just about the number of jobs that sit in the fishing fleet, it's what they support onshore as well. And the industries that they too feed. Scotland prides itself on fresh produce, and the fishing industry is a huge part of that. It attracts tourists. It's not just, this is not a sort of, we can look at one issue in isolation. We have to look at all of them together. And that's one of the reasons why, we are working really closely with the fishing sector. We were in really close dialogue with them around highly protected marine areas, because that was a huge issue for them. And we wanted to make sure that we could help where we could on that kind of issue. And we also want to make sure that we work together on guidance to help both of our sectors gain, one, a better understanding of each other, but also to compensate where that's necessary, because there will be times when it is necessary for the renewable sector to compensate fishers. And that is all about us just driving stronger relationships, getting better intelligence across both. But we are working, we do have active working groups on that. I'm working with Elspeth on the coexistence issues for the fishing. It won't just be fishing. That's what we're starting to uncover. We've got all sorts.
It's the whole marine economy at the end of the day, isn't it? That it all has to work together in harmony as much as possible, and dialogue and open conversation is going to be really key to that, and everybody feeling heard and listened to, for sure.
And not just shutting down barriers, absolute red lines. It's like, right, okay, is there a technological way around this? Is there a legal way around this? Is there what can we make work?
Yeah, agreed. We've got another question from Fiona, and she's asked, two questions. What are your thoughts on whether universities are training on preparing people for work? And then secondly, how do we assist COVID kids get the skills needed for work? And you've just mentioned your kids, and I'm sure they were affected by that.
And they're both COVID kids. Yeah, they are. Right. What thoughts on universities or training? I think there's a place for all of this, right? We've got to remember that we need a multi-faceted skills system, right? And this is where I'm going to get onto the private sector bit of it. So the universities do what they do really well. I came through university twice. I've fared very well for it. I loved it. Really worked for me. I enjoy writing essays and doing that kind of stuff. Not for everyone. But I think we've always got to be clear that in a perfect world, people would just pop out of university, and nobody ever is. They just, they come into your workplace, and you have to accept that there is a bit of a lag for to the point that they become fully productive and useful. And it's about us as employers recognising that mix within our workforce as well, and making sure that we too have supports in place to manage all of this stuff. I think, in terms of, are they providing the right kind of courses? I do think funding is a really big issue, not just for universities, but colleges as well, because the way the system is working right now, it does feel like it's incentivising slightly different things to what we perhaps need, right? And I think that's probably more acute in the college sector. And so that needs a good look from a political perspective as to how, political and the civil service sort of look at how we create a system that genuinely attracts the right kind of people and provides the right kind of courses and is linked in some way to your economy, to your outputs, because that's what's really, really we need to do. I think we need to be alive to the fact, because one of the things I can see coming forward, and it's in this conversation, is, well, you know, the developers, the energy developers have got loads of money. Why don't we get them just to plug the gaps in the college sector, pay for skills? And I think my answer to that is, I'm afraid we already do. You know, it's another one of these unknown quantities that really needs some analysis done to it. Is, you know, I have numerous members. You know, you go all over, you know, look at Leith, at the Port of Leith, if you look at NIG, if you go all over Scottish Power, SSE, they have skills academies. You know, they are training people. They're doing this right now, and the throughput from that is actually pretty massive. I think we just don't have a good handle. It's all happening in a bit of a disparate way. We don't have a good handle on the whole of that, which is what is the investment the industry itself is already making. And actually, maybe they're doing it because they can't get it from the public sector. So maybe we should be looking at what these guys are doing and use it to inform anything which feels really easy and doesn't cost money that we should be doing.
And within those skills academies, are you seeing much more openness to apprenticeships and bringing on people without going down the traditional sort of university track?
I think that's the thing, is that we actually, if you look at, you know, 2030 is a big date for us in energy, and obviously a big date for UK government and for Chris Stark, who's obviously leading that Green Power mission as well. And I think when you look at this issue, we don't actually have time to go through a university-led pathway right now, you know, if we want to get people in here to help us to do the 2030 thing. So actually, yes. And you do, I mean, apprenticeships they fell out of favour for a long time, but now they're back again. I think we have to be really clear that, you know, you do need to support apprentices as well, and you need to, as a business, it is an ask of your workforce, and it is an ask of your productivity. You know, that is just a fact, that you get the payoff earlier than you would if you just kind of draw people out of the graduate system. But let's not forget, there is still a bit of shaping that needs to go on in there. So again, I think some of this does come down to employers as to, you know, have an apprenticeship programme, but remember, you need to embed your middle management and supervisory level roles with skills and expertise to help support that. Otherwise, you're not going to get the best value out of it. Yeah. And I think apprentices have, because of the apprenticeship levy and a lot of the contention between government and industry on that, they've suffered a lot from that point. Not so much here in Scotland, but elsewhere in the UK.
And then I think there's obviously the time investment as well, isn't there? Being committed to actually, if you're going to bring them on, then you need to give them the proper time to train and help them develop and learn those skills. In terms of the COVID kids, what do you think? Is apprenticeships a good option for those that perhaps have found it difficult? Or do you think there's another option?
We're straying quite far off SR view and onto my own personal opinion now on this stage. I think the COVID thing was really hard for a number of kids, and in particular, I think the ones who were in transitional years, so the P7s going up to high school and the ones, you know, going through high school, it was really, really tricky. And I think we do need to recognise, it was for a COVID mum. Great, I'll give you that one then. I'll give you that, right? Super. So my opinion as a COVID mum on this was one of the reasons my son fell out of school was because of this, because we did this thing where, and it's mind-boggling, and there's a lesson in here for us as a nation. It's mind-boggling what we did, which was we cancelled school, and we said, that's not that important, and we left it up to the teachers and the ones who were most inspired and were most digitally literate to decide whether they were going to teach lessons or not. And the kids just got my kids certainly got the message that school's not important. And it took about 2 years for their school to bring them back in and go, no, this is really, really important. And one of the things that probably would have helped was, and I don't criticise my kids' school for this, they have a brilliant school for this. They went to a very big, you know, not a private school, public school. They went to my local high school, and they did have very strong links into workplace skills. they did have really, really good links into there. And I think that is an important thing, was that the kids lost the navigation. They kind of went, right, well, if school's not important, what is? Oh, I don't know. And so I'm just going to get a bit lost in this whole process. And I think that's pulling them back into, what's your purpose? What is it you want to do here? What's your strengths? What's your skill set? And maybe just approaching things a little bit from that perspective. And again, I come back to that career service point, which is that you need to sort of really outline, my son in particular, let's say one of the reasons he became a school avoider was because he went, I've never used this stuff. Maths in particular, and it's one of the in renewables. It's a big issue, is keeping people on that STEM pathway. He was, when am I ever going to use that at work? And I was struggling to come up with an answer for that. I really was, but now he's an apprentice electrician, and I'm able to sort of go, see, some of that math stuff that you said was just garbage. There you are, you're using it now, aren't you? And he's the other thing he didn't learn was computer skills. He went on to this college course and he couldn't type a Word document. And that was a real, he could take you through 25 levels of Call of Duty, quick as you like, but he wasn't, and so we maybe slipped a little bit too far towards that gamification kind of pedagogy and trying to make everything dead fun and all of that. And this isn't, and we didn't place the need to actually do some academic stuff that is good and baseline and link it into the workplace. I think is really, really important.
But I think from that, the takeaway I think is really that there's lessons to be learned from how that was actually dealt with, both in the way or the importance that was given to education, but also how you brought people back into the fold, and that can apply not only to kids affected by COVID, but to the industry in general, trying to attract people to the sector. Can we apply some of the same lessons to the sector more broadly, going forward?
Yeah. No, I think it is, and it comes back to the key question of why is this important? And I think that applies to COVID, and it also applies to attracting people into the sector, is providing that assurance that what you're doing and what you're learning now will be useful in 20 to 30 years' time. And this, again, is a really tough time for people. We're sitting on the cusp of AI really starting to change jobs and the workplace for people. And for anyone, there is that sort of, I don't want to invest in the wrong thing, and a skills investment is a huge investment for both an employer and an employee. I went back to school, if you will, in 2017 when, and it was really tough. I went back and did my master's, and it took a lot of commitment on both sides to make that work. So, kind of returning to the, why are you doing this? What's the purpose of what you're doing? Why is this important? Is just as important for our kids who fell out of school because they were told school wasn't important as it is for people who work in oil and gas to go, well, energy is still important. Scotland is still an important player in the energy sector. Clearly, that's a really, really key point.
Yeah, I think that messaging is key, isn't it? And making sure that everyone's on board and getting that across. It's going to be really important. So I think we're out of questions. So I think that will be a good place, I think, for us to end today's session. My takeaway from today is that what is happening at the moment within the sector is very exciting. We are at a stage where we can really realise the full potential for Scotland to be a leader within the renewable energy sector, really lead the way on energy transition. There is collaboration happening within the sector. We've got these new initiatives, Skills England, the Powerhouse, the Energy Passport, all of these things are happening. And it's these kind of initiatives going forward that I think are going to be really essential to develop a skills programme that can focus on sustainability within the sector, which is what we're going to need if we're going to create these long-term career options within the sector. So it's positive, I think. I think that's the takeaway, is that we're on the right path and we're developing the right kind of programmes to make this happen.
Agreed. And like I say, I think there's a lot of things we can do that don't need to cost loads of money, but there are some things that we need to do that will cost money. And we need to just accept that needs to be part of any kind of spending review, whether it is at UK or Scottish Government level. I think, there are a number of great concepts out there that we can build upon. We touched upon green free ports, but they're very much at the heart of, there's other things being hung on them, place-based growth, which is, now part of that kind of wider ecosystem where they're going to act as a vortex for, almost become sort of the Silicon Valley of perhaps, for energy and for green industries as well. And I think that's a really exciting concept. I think it's brilliant. And let's work with it and use it and make it work for us, and get us to do what we need to do. But, I think it is that acceptance that you need to spend something to do something here. We are going to need to do a bit of hearts and minds. We need a sophisticated conversation on immigration, and that needs evidence to support it. But building on our strengths and not trying to be all things to all people is a crucial part of creating employment at the right time in the right place.
Great. Thanks very much, Claire. And thank you so much for your insight today. I think it's been really interesting. And I'm sure everybody has found this a really helpful conversation. So thank you very much. For everyone that's joined us today, I'd just like to also take the opportunity to say that you can catch up on the rest of the conversations that have been happening this week as part of Marine Economy Week. Both the conversations and various insights are available to you on our website. You'll be able to download them and take them in at your leisure. So thanks very much for joining in this afternoon, and thanks again to Claire.
Thanks for the opportunity. Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.